Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians during a military raid in occupied Kashmir's Budgam district. The occupation forces have martyred 20 Kashmiris this month alone. The valley has been under a curfew since India revoked its autonomy in August last year. Azerbaijan has accused Armenia of targeting its civilian areas as the fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh enters the 5th week. The Azeri Defense Ministry says a number of civilians were killed by the Armenian shelling in the Barda region. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said he is disappointed over the increased violence in Nagorno-Karabakh. In the Philippines, strong winds and rains from Typhoon MOLAVE have left 9 people dead and several others injured. Officials say the storm has so far displaced 210,000 residents. Over at Vietnam, 2 people died and 26 fishermen went missing after the typhoon lashed the country's central coastline. The global number of COVID-19 infections has topped 44 million with more than 1.16 million deaths. The U.S. is the worst hit country with 8.7 million cases, followed by India with almost 8 million infections. Pakistan's caseload has topped 330,000, while coronavirus death toll stands at 6,759. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. And now for the news in more detail. Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians in occupied Kashmir. The youth were targeted during a military raid in the Budgam district. A cordon and search operation was continuing by the troops in Machoa area of the district till last reports came in. The Indian forces have martyred 20 Kashmiris this month alone, while 40 people were wounded due to an indiscriminate use of live ammunition and pellet guns by the occupation forces. The occupied valley has been under a curfew since India revoked its autonomy in August last year. Moving on, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad will continue to facilitate the Afghan peace process. He said this during a telephone conversation with his Afghan counterpart, Mohammad Hanif Atmar. Qureshi said the intra-Afghan talks have provided a historic opportunity for peace, which the Afghan leadership must capitalize on. He added that Pakistan has introduced a new visa policy to facilitate the travel of Afghan people. Meanwhile, in a meeting in Islamabad, officials from both countries agreed to resolve issues related to bilateral trade. This comes as the Afghan government and the Taliban are engaged in talks in Doha to end the decades-long war. But a UN report has said that violence has increased in recent months despite the ongoing peace efforts. The International Atomic Energy Agency says Iran has started building an underground centrifuge assembly plant. In an interview, agency head Rafael Grossi said Iran continues to stockpile greater amounts of low-enriched uranium. In July, the Natanz nuclear site was exploded in what Tehran called a sabotage attack. Under a 2015 nuclear deal, Iran is allowed to produce a certain amount of enriched uranium for non-military purposes, but it has been steadily exceeding the deal's limits after the U.S. unilaterally left the agreement in 2018. And moving on, Azerbaijan has accused Armenia of targeting its civilian areas as the fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh enters the 5th week. The Azeri Defense Ministry says a number of civilians were killed by the Armenian shelling in the Barda region. Over 1,000 people have been killed in the clashes over Nagorno-Karabakh. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said he is disappointed over the increased violence. This comes after the two sides accuse each other of violating a U.S.-brokered truce. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed his concerns over an involvement of fighters from the Middle East in the conflict. He was talking to Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan over the phone. And more on Turkey. Turkey's parliament has strongly condemned French President Emmanuel Macron's derogatory remarks against Islam. A joint declaration by the House says Macron's attitude towards Muslims can cause conflicts among people of different beliefs. It called on the world's opinion leaders and politicians to adopt an attitude towards common sense and peace. Macron has sparked outrage across the Muslim world by his anti-Islam statement. He also defended the publication of blasphemous caricatures. Pakistan, Iran, and several Arab states have voiced anger over the provocative remarks amid calls for a boycott of French products. And in France, a mosque located in Vernon district has received a note containing death threats and insults. The note says the war has begun and all Muslims will be driven out of France soon. The notice left in the mosque's mailbox also contained disrespectful remarks against Muslim women who don headscarves. A wave of Islamophobia has been stirred in France following President Emmanuel Macron's remarks against Islam. Several Muslim countries, including Pakistan, Turkey, and Iran, have lodged protest over the French president's comments. Now, over 70 million Americans have cast their ballots ahead of the U.S. presidential election on November 3rd. The U.S. Elections Project says the number represents more than half of the total turnout of the 2016 election. With just a week to go, the race for the White House is now in top gear. Both President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden continue to spar over the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. At a campaign rally in Wisconsin, Trump claimed the number of infections and hospitalizations are down. Addressing a drive-in event in Atlanta, Georgia, Joe Biden said Trump had abandoned American families and surrendered to the pandemic. Biden said Trump has failed to recognize the problem of systemic racism in the country.
The thing that can tear America apart is America itself. No other nation can do it. Only America can tear America apart. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Let's show them who we are. We choose hope over fear, unity over division, science over fiction, and yes, truth over lies.
Moving on, polling has begun in India's second most populous state of Bihar in the first major election since the COVID-19 outbreak started in the country. New Delhi is going ahead with the vote despite India being the second worst hit country by the pandemic. With 243 seats up for grabs, the vote is being seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's handling of COVID-19. The BJP has ruled the state for over a decade in alliance with the regional party, the Janata Dal, and it is yet to win Bihar on its own. Despite two successive federal wins since 2014, Modi has lost a whopping 6 state elections. Polling will conclude in 3 phases and votes will be counted on the 10th of November. Moving forward, Tanzanians are voting today to elect a new president and parliament. Over 29 million people are registered to vote to decide the fate of President John Magufuli, who seeks re-election. Voters will choose from 15 presidential candidates and elect lawmakers for 264 parliamentary seats. Under Tanzania's electoral rules, the winning candidate requires a simple majority to become president. Violence broke out ahead of the vote, with the police being accused of killing 9 people in the semi-autonomous region of Zanzibar. Opposition has also accused the government supporters of shooting dead 2 people at an election rally. The global number of COVID-19 infections has topped 44 million, with more than 1.16 million deaths. The U.S. is the worst hit country with 8.7 million cases, followed by India with almost 8 million infections. More in the following report. The surging second wave of COVID-19 has forced countries to reconsider nationwide lockdowns. Number of cases in Latin American countries of Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico are spiking at an unprecedented rate. The outbreak in the U.S. is more aggressive than ever, with the country reporting a record of more than 500,000 new cases over the past week. But President Donald Trump says the reports of the spread of the virus in the U.S. is a Democratic election campaign gimmick.
And we had a spike in Miami, we had a spike in Texas, Arizona. It's all way down to very low numbers. But I'll tell you, all they want to talk about is COVID. But the good news, on the 4th, they'll stop talking. You watch. They'll stop talking. You get out that red wave, just get out. We have to win this election.
Over the past week, Europe has accounted for the greatest proportion of all new cases in the world and 1/3 of all deaths. While Britain struggles to contain the outbreak despite new policies, UK Vaccines Task Force has classified the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines being produced by Russia and other countries as imperfect and risky. The French government is mulling month-long national lockdown as country's hospitals hit record saturation in 2 weeks.
Parce qu'on sait ce qu'on a vécu.
We know what we went through last time. During the first wave, we were in it, we didn't know what to expect. Now we do know what to expect, and we are even nervous that it could be worse. Because unfortunately, with everything we are seeing in the streets, everything we are hearing, it is tough.
Meanwhile, China has reported 42 new infections in the last 24 hours. This is the country's highest daily toll in more than 2 months due to a rise in the cases in the northwestern Xinjiang region. And in Pakistan, 14 more people have died of coronavirus overnight, raising the death toll to 6,759. The health ministry says 825 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 11,500 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 330,000 countrywide patients, more than 311,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 144,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 103,000 cases. In the capital city of Islamabad, more than 19,000 people have been infected so far. And in Thailand, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has refused to resign despite mass protests. Speaking in the parliament, the Prime Minister said he will not run away from problems. Chan-o-cha described the protest as illegal and ordered a stricter action against them. The Prime Minister accused some protesters of aggravated assault and violence and called for an end to riots. Opposition members told Prayut to stop hiding behind proclamations of loyalty to the monarchy and to step down. Meanwhile, protest leaders have dismissed the 2-day parliamentary session as useless. The protests in Thailand have intensified a year after courts banned a political party opposing the government of Chan-o-cha. And moving on, Belarusian opposition leader has appealed to people to throw their support behind a national strike to oust President Alexander Lukashenko. On the second day of the strike, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has said she will paralyze the country. In a social media post, Tikhanovskaya said employees at a string of major companies are refusing to work their shifts. But she said they are coming under colossal pressure from the authorities. She added every active, peaceful step brings the country closer to freedom of political prisoners and holding fair elections. The Interior Ministry says authorities have arrested more than 500 people during anti-government protests on Monday. We'll be back with more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The UN has voiced concerns over possible human rights violations in Myanmar's upcoming general elections in November. UN Rights Office spokesperson said the civic space in Myanmar is still marred by restrictions on freedoms of opinion. In a press briefing, she said an internet shutdown remains in place in 8 townships in the Rakhine and Chin states. The spokesperson warned authorities against violating the right to political participation of Rohingya Muslims. She also deplored the proliferation of hate speech against Muslims by candidates on social media. It urged the government to undertake necessary measures to ensure Muslims' rights. And in the Philippines, strong winds and rains from Typhoon MOLAVE have left 9 people dead and several others injured. Officials say the storm has so far displaced 210,000 residents. MOLAVE is the 17th tropical cyclone battering the Southeast Asian country this year. Over in Vietnam, 2 people died and 26 fishermen went missing after the typhoon lashed the country's central coastline. Authorities have evacuated hundreds of thousands of people from the path of the storm. Vietnam has seen 9 storms this past year. And Tropical Storm Zeta is heading towards the U.S. Gulf Coast after slamming Mexico overnight. Quintana Roo Governor Carlos Joaquin says the storm did not cause any serious damage. Zeta made landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula north of Tulum, Mexico, as a Category 1 hurricane. Quintana Roo State Governor Carlos Joaquin Gonzalez said the hurricane did not inflict any serious damage. Gonzalez said a couple of airports have resumed regular operations.
We have to clean our streets again. We have to get our energy systems, potable water, and public services back up where they're lacking so that we can get them back up today or at least tomorrow. We hope it turns out that way and we keep moving our economic recovery forward.
Authorities say Zeta has moved back to the sea towards the U.S. coast. And moving on, 4 people have died after a boat carrying some 20 migrants capsized off the coast of Lune Plage in northern France. Authorities say 15 people have been rescued, with 8 suffering from hypothermia, while 2 undergoing cardiac arrest. They say rescue operation is underway for a missing migrant. Several thousand migrants have attempted the dangerous crossing of the English Channel this year. Colombia's Navy has seized 2 tons of cocaine that was being transported inside a semi-submersible sea vessel. Navy says 3 suspects belonging to Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico were arrested. Officials say the submarine was escorted by the Navy to a port at Tumaco in southwestern Colombia. The anti-narcotics officials estimate that the drug's value is over $18.6 million. The shipment was headed to the Jalisco New Generation cartel in Mexico. And a larger-than-life sculpture by Swiss artist Alberto Giacometti is up for sale at Sotheby's in New York. Valued at over $90 million, Graphem 1 is being sold by an online sealed bidding strategy. More in the following report.
Swiss-born Giacometti is one of the best sculptors of the 20th century. Graphem 1 is one of 4 sculptures Giacometti conceived and cast in 1960. They were originally to be installed in Chase Plaza in Manhattan, but the installation never happened. Monumental sculpture could very well sell for more than $100 million, as Giacomotti's work regularly breaks auction records. His Pointing Man was sold for $141 million in New York in 2015, the largest sum ever for a sculpture at an auction. Sotheby's has also displayed their upcoming Impressionist, Modern, and Contemporary art evening sales. Among the highlights of that sale are Mark Rothko's painting Untitled Black on Maroon and a Vincent van Gogh floral painting called Fleurs d'un Verre.
And Mexicans are honoring health workers battling COVID-19 on the Day of the Dead this year. More in the following report.
The Dead is a pre-Hispanic tradition in which families remember their dead and celebrate the continuity of life. As the world deals with the virus that risks bringing death to everyone's door, Mexico City's Museo del Carmen opens its doors with this day's offering dedicated to the health workers on the front line of the battle against the coronavirus pandemic.
These souls help the sun to set and go through the underworld to come out again. And here we show they had certain characteristics. The deceased became small hummingbirds who returned to earth. And it was as though they returned and they could see the flowers and people knew they were dead who had come back to life in some way.
The pandemic still afflicting much of the country, celebrations this year are a little more somber. Rather than the usual social gatherings and events, residents can explore the museum's offering at a responsible distance.
We needed spaces like this, keeping a safe distance, following protocols, so that we are able to visit and relive some of the experiences we had every year on the Day of the Dead.
Mexico's Day of the Dead celebrations are considered a cultural heritage by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
And in the world of business, European stocks have fallen sharply as new restrictions in the region sink hopes of economic recovery. The spread of COVID-19 continues across the continent, while U.S. election uncertainty compounds risk of sentiment. Frankfurt's DAX and the CAC 40 in Paris have plummeted over 3%. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 shed over 2%, with travel and leisure stocks falling. London's FTSE plunged nearly 2%, while Italy's FTSE MIB dived over 3.5%. Earlier Asian stocks traded mixed. Japanese stocks and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index shed, while South Korean, Australian, and mainland Chinese bourses edged up. And in the UEFA Champions League, Manchester City beat Olympique Marseille by 3-0 in their Group C clash. Ferran Torres, Ilkay Gundogan, and Raheem Sterling were on target as Pep Guardiola's men stayed top of the standings.
In the other Group C match, the Portuguese giants FC Porto beat Olympiacos Piraeus by 2-0 at the Estadio do Dragão. In Group A, holders Bayern Munich edged host Lokomotiv Moscow by 2-1. While Atletico Madrid fought back to beat Red Bull Salzburg by 3-2. In Group B, 13-time winners Real Madrid snatched a late 2-2 draw at Borussia Mönchengladbach, and Inter Milan and Shakhtar Donetsk played out a goalless draw in Kiev. The 2019 champions Liverpool labored to a 2-0 home win against Midtjylland in Group D, while the Atalanta overcame a 2-goal deficit to earn a 2-2 draw at Ajax.
For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.